I really struggle with this question. I almost didn't even want to make it a topic because like my thoughts are going to kind of be all over the place here. Because I understand why Nebraska fans are questioning if Matt Rhule is the guy. I mean, I if I was a Nebraska fan, I'd probably be questioning the same thing. But we've also seen so many coaches do this. We've also seen so many coaches lose the close games at Nebraska that like I think you have to look at what Matt Rhule has done and say the future is more promising with him than what it was with Scott Frost, what it was with the other coaches, right? Like,
Hmm.
I get he had family and that helps, but like Matt Rhule brought you in a 5-star quarterback, like one of the best quarterbacks in the country in the recruiting class. He brought him in and he started in year one, which to me was a gutsy thing to do, but it's what should have been done, right? He fired his offensive coordinator, who obviously needed to be fired. He didn't just fire him, he went out and got somebody else, brought him in as an analyst, and a week later made him the offensive coordinator. Like, that's a bold move by Matt
Yeah.
Rhule. And just like listening to Matt Rhule talk, I get that like not everybody will get this, but just go listen to a press conference by Matt Rhule for a minute. Like I listened to that guy for 5 minutes, and I'm just like, I would walk like I I would run, I would march anywhere for this dude. The leader that he
Hmm.
is, and the confidence that he bestows upon his team, and the way that he coaches football, and what he wants for these guys, and everything. Like there is just so much about Matt Rhule that I really, really love and I want the
Yeah.
best for, but I'm also like, is it Matt Rhule or is it just Nebraska?
Yeah.
Because
That's a
I'm
good
leaning it's just
question.
Nebraska,
I,
which sucks because I don't want to do that to Nebraska. I don't want to say that,
yeah.
but if I'm being honest, like that's where I'm at.
Yeah. I'll push back just a little bit for a couple reasons. One is that so this is not me saying fire Matt Rule. I just want to be very, very clear. I'm not saying I'm not there yet. I won't be there yet, even if they miss a bowl game, which I think is becoming more and more like reasonable to expect that they miss a bowl game. They have Iowa and Wisconsin. Both of those they can win, by the way. Like I'm not saying they will lose both of those games. They're both winnable. I think Wisconsin is going to be I think that's going to be an interesting game, especially with Longo out now. Um,
Don't you get the feeling like both coaches are kind of coaching for their job?
yeah, and I feel like Fickle and Rule are actually both in similar situations. And here's my caveat with Rule is that I think Matt Rule, I think he's a really good coach, but he's never had a program with the prestige of Nebraska, and he's never coached in a conference like this Big Ten, which we're seeing a lot of teams that I think would, in the old Big Ten might get away with being 7-4, 8, or 7-5, 8-4, like Michigan this year. You can't because you've got a lot of good teams, some that are not as good but are punching above their weight, and then you have others that uh, that are elite teams like in Oregon, like Ohio State. Um, this conference is a lot better from top to bottom than I think people realized.
Right.
And so Matt Rule has never coached in, in an atmosphere like this outside of the NFL, and he was not good in the NFL. So I think there's a question that still remains of like, I think Matt Rule still is the guy, and I think he I think he hired a bad staff, particularly offensively, and he should have fired Satterfield, you know, right after the end of last season, and he didn't. And
Yeah.
I think that is what ultimately has held them back from a schematic standpoint. But he has done way more than Scott Frost ever did to kind of energize the program. But I do think I don't think he's on the hot seat, but I think you look at this and you're like, okay, what's changed?
Yeah.
And that would be my biggest question is like, has anything I think things have fundamentally changed in terms of structure, but the results have not changed. And so the question is, okay, have all those changes that Rhule has brought, do they result in more wins by year 3? If not, you got to let them go.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with this one because we've seen Matt Rhule get success in year 3 primarily, right? We've seen Matt Rhule really struggle in year 1 at both Baylor and Temple. Really struggle year 1, and then year 2 he's around 500, which he's around right now in this one. Still has the opportunity to make a bowl game. Let's not count him out yet. They have Wisconsin and at Iowa next, and those are both winnable games. I think, Iowa's much more likely that they'll lose that one than Wisconsin, but they're both winnable games for them. And at the end of the day, like we can't count them out yet because I agree with you. I do think this program is in a better place, and for me, like that's why I'm like you can't fire him this season.
Yeah.
You have to give him at least one more year to see. Like
Yeah.
he in the past, year 3 is when he's gotten those 8-9 win teams.
Yeah. 10.
Does he bring it in year 3? At least 7 wins. At least 7 wins in year 3. I think the biggest issue was that you had the 5-star quarterback. You were 5-1. You beat Colorado, and everybody was just so high on the program that it set these expectations for like, well, we're going to be a 9-win football team, And I think that everyone should have realized those expectations were too high, but we all kind of bought into them. I mean, you and I did, right? We thought, oh, Nebraska, this is a really good team. Tony White's a good defensive coordinator, and maybe they can get through it without the offense.
Well, but that's where I'm like, were those expectations too high? Because I look at the schedule that they've played thus far. They should have beat Illinois. That's a win.
Yeah.
Right?
They should have beat them.
They should have beat Ohio State. Like, if we're being completely honest.
Yeah, Dylan Raiola missed throws to win that game at the end of it. Yeah.
Yeah. They should have beat UCLA. Like that was a winnable game. Like that's 3 wins. They'd be 8-2 right now.
Or if they get at least one of those 3.
Yeah, if they got one of those 3, they're 6-4.
Yeah, and they're
right?
bowl eligible.
So I'm not saying maybe 9 wins was a little like jumping the shark, but I think the rap the rap guru is saying we're not blaming Matt. We're absolutely blaming Matt.
Yeah.
Like, and I think his failure was sticking with Satterfield.
Yeah.
More than anything else. Like that's his grave that he's buried. And he cut bait. I don't know if Holgorsen's the answer. I think similar, like he's got to figure out who he wants them to be, especially if they can keep Raiola, which I think that's a big deal. It's like, can you keep Raiola with, if you go 5-7 again?
He's transferred everywhere he's gone, so who knows? Yeah. I mean, it could happen this year. You got a Nebraska fan in the chat, Vince. He says, as a Nebraska fan, the fans are on the cusp of running another coach with their need for instant gratification and are going further into the dumpster instead of trusting the process. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. Like I get the frustration with Matt Rhule. I get the expectation of like we were 5-1 and we just lost 4 or 5 games straight, however much it is, 4 games straight. I get all of that. But I'm also like, give him one more year. Like, trust that Matt Rhule is going to turn this thing around because historically, Matt Rhule has turned it around in year 3. And if it pays off, great. If it doesn't pay off, this is probably where you would be with a new coach anyway. Like, yeah. I hate playing this card, but like, let's just be completely honest for a second. Like, who are you going to get that's going to get you 9 wins next year? Kirk Signetti's don't just fall off trees, or grow on trees, whatever that saying is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I do think though it would behoove Matt Rhule to adopt more of a Signetti type attitude next year. Like you cannot play, well, we're still building. Like, I feel like the first 2 years you're building the foundation, but he needs to come in like almost, I don't think he said it, but it was like, they were confident that they were going to beat Colorado, and they did, and they beat them soundly. And now, we forget that. They beat Colorado, who's on the cusp of winning the Big 12. That's what they can do. Now, can they stack on that? And I feel like we can't play next year. Well, we're still building to be a good team. No, you need to be the good team that you said you were going to be.
Right.
And I think he needs to bring that attitude and bring that attitude not just for himself, but the players. Bring in transfers like that too. Like who are the transfers you can get, like a guy like an Elijah Surratt, like a Curtis Rourke, where you're like, we're going to inject a winning attitude and production into this squad to help us get there.
And the other piece of it that you always have to consider, it's not fun for fans to consider, but Matt Rhule's buyout, $62 million.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, that's the other piece of it too. Like we can rant and rave all we want on like they should fire him, they shouldn't fire it. Like I think we have to understand in this new world of college football where the schools are going to be paying players. Like, and I've seen people talk about Franklin and Billy Napier in the chat and all that stuff. Like, I fully get that, but like in this new world of college football, you are not going to see as many firings of head coaches. You're going to be seeing a lot more firings of coordinators than you will head coaches because of the buyouts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that will probably change in the future because they'll probably restructure the buyouts to be easier. But right now, you've got 20, 30, in this case, $60 million buyouts for coaches that teams would like to move on from and fans would like to move on from. The point is, like, you're just not gonna be able to pay 62 million and then next year pay 20 million to your roster as well. Like,
yeah.
I know it's the Big Ten. Like the Big Ten has a lot of money, but not that much.
Right. Well, and
So.
I think it goes back to where we both are is that like this is a disappointment. But Matt Rhule is not a guy like the guy that I said they needed to fire way before, and I think we both were agreement on this, was Scott Frost. And the reason is because you could see the writing on the wall everywhere he went. Like the reputation, the attitude, like it just seemed like you could see the energy had been sucked out of the program and out of the boosters and all that. With Rhule, I think the results are disappointing, but everything around it still, I think, is good. And I think that's what you got to give him another year. If nothing else, to be like, hey, we've invested this money. We can't, if we fire him, we're leveling the whole thing again.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there. If like the program was in a spot where like players were quitting, they were actively sitting out and stuff like that, entering the transfer portal, yeah. But you're right. The program is not in a spot where it's toxic right now. I'm not going to say it's in a great spot, but it's not a spot where it's toxic right now. The results just aren't on the field. So.
Yeah.